The shocking truth, hospital broke silence revealed. The fluorescent lights in the abandoned wing of Beijing's Chaoyang District Hospital never fully died. They flickered like dying stars over the sealed doors, the empty gurneys, the rooms that official records claimed had been closed for renovation years ago. At 3:17 a.m. on a night that never made the news, a single file left that building. Not through the front gates. Through a service corridor that did not appear on any public blueprint. The person who carried it was not a doctor. Not a nurse. Not a police officer. She was a night shift records clerk who had spent 11 years filing death certificates that never quite matched the bodies. That night she stopped filing. She started running. What she released was not a rumor. It was a sequence of internal logs, trauma photographs with timestamps, toxicology panels that contradicted every public statement, and one audio recording made on a phone that should have been confiscated. The recording lasts 4 minutes and 12 seconds. In it, a senior attending physician speaks in a voice that has already accepted what is about to happen. He is still conscious. The fall did not kill him. The fall was the cover. We need the abdomen opened before the transfer team arrives. The drive is still inside. If they find it on the official autopsy, everything collapses. The clerk who stole that file did not survive the week. Her body was found in a different district, ruled an overdose. The file survived. It moved through encrypted channels, through people who no longer trusted any institution, until it reached the only place left that still allowed certain truths to surface: the open internet beyond the Great Firewall. This is what the hospital finally admitted when the silence broke. Yu Menglong did not simply fall. He was brought into the hospital alive. Not through the emergency entrance. Through a loading dock reserved for special transfers. The time-stamp on the security log that was supposed to have been wiped shows 5:41 a.m. on September 11th. The official story claimed his body was discovered on the pavement after an accidental fall from height while intoxicated. The internal log shows something else. A living man restrained with multiple blunt force injuries inconsistent with a single fall, and a ruptured soft tissue pattern that forensic pathologists privately flagged as premortem trauma of non-impact origin. The first doctor to examine him wrote 3 words in the margin of the intake form before the form was pulled: still fighting. They sedated him anyway. What followed was not treatment. It was extraction. The USB drive that online theories had whispered about for months was real. It had been surgically placed weeks earlier during a private medical procedure that never appeared in any clinic's records. The drive contained financial ledgers, encrypted video files, and correspondence linking several high-profile entertainment executives to a network of private investment parties that operated far outside legal boundaries. You had threatened to release it. He had already begun transferring fragments to people he believed were safe. Those people began disappearing from public view within days of his death. Inside the sealed operating suite, the attending team worked under orders that came from outside the hospital hierarchy. The orders were simple: recover the device, sanitize the body, prepare a narrative that would survive the first 48 hours of public scrutiny. The false story was chosen because it was already circulating among the witnesses at the apartment complex. Alcohol was added because it explained the lack of struggle on the official report. The mother's statement was drafted before she was even informed of the full findings. She was told only that her son had fallen after drinking. She was not shown the photographs. She was not allowed to see the body before cremation was ordered. The cremation never happened. The body was transferred at 3 a.m. the following night through a service tunnel that connected the hospital basement to a private cold storage facility used by certain art institutions for biological research specimens. The facility's director later claimed the transfer was a routine donation for plastination studies. The paperwork listed an anonymous donor. The ankle marks the clerk photographed before the transfer matched the purple ligature impressions visible in the leaked trauma images. The body was not cremated. It was preserved. When the first fragments of the hospital file began circulating, the official response was immediate and coordinated. 3 women who had posted early versions of the story were detained for spreading rumors that disrupted public order. Weibo deleted more than 100,000 posts in a single week. The comment functions on related topics were disabled. The studio that had represented Yu issued a second statement in the mother's name urging the public to stop speculating. The mother herself was no longer reachable by any independent journalist. But the file kept moving. The toxicology panel inside it showed blood alcohol levels far lower than the official report claimed. The panel also showed the presence of a short-acting paralytic agent administered shortly before the recorded time of the fall. The agent was consistent with compounds used in certain private medical procedures to keep a subject conscious but immobile. The pattern of genital trauma and internal injuries did not match a fall from height. They matched sustained physical assault followed by forced extraction. One of the nurses who had been present in the suite later attempted to leave the country. She was stopped at the border. Her passport was flagged. She has not been heard from since. Another staff member who tried to speak to a foreign correspondent was transferred to a different facility overnight and has not answered any further contact. The hospital's official silence held for months. Then the pressure became too great. Anonymous internal messages began appearing on overseas platforms. They were written in the clipped, exhausted language of people who had already decided the cost of speaking was lower than the cost of remaining quiet. One message stated simply, "We were ordered to treat the living as already dead. We complied. The drive was recovered. The story was written. The body was moved. Everything after that was performance. The performance continued." State media repeated the accidental fall narrative. Celebrity accounts that had once worked with you remained silent or posted carefully neutral memorials. The entertainment industry that had once celebrated him treated his name as radioactive. Projects he had been attached to quietly removed his credit. Streaming platforms adjusted metadata. The public was told to move on. They did not. The file the records clerk stole contained something else. A secondary log of communications between hospital administrators and an external liaison office. The communications referenced a list of 17 names. Some of those names belonged to people who had been present at the gathering the night before you died. Others belonged to figures whose influence reached far beyond the entertainment world. One name appeared repeatedly with the notation "containment priority." That name has never been publicly linked to the case in any official document. Online researchers who attempted to connect the dots found their accounts suspended within hours. The most disturbing section of the file is not the medical data. It is the sequence of decisions made after the extraction. The team discussed whether the injuries could be made to look consistent with a fall. They decided they could not. The solution was to limit access to the body, accelerate the cremation paperwork, and rely on the mother's statement to close public questions. When the mother's statement was released, it contained language that matched, almost word for word, a draft prepared inside the hospital 2 days earlier. She had been given a script. The clerk who released the file left one final note in the encrypted package. It was short. "I filed death certificates for 11 years. Most of them were honest. This one was not. He was alive when they brought him in. He was conscious when they opened him. He knew what they were taking. I heard him. The recording is real. The photographs are real. The silence is the only thing that was manufactured. I am already gone. Do not look for me. Look at the file." That is where the official story ends and the real one begins. The hospital that broke its silence did not do so willingly. It did so because the people who had been ordered to bury the truth finally understood that the truth would not stay buried. The body was not cremated. The drive was recovered. The injuries were not from a fall. The alcohol story was a convenience. The mother's statement was managed. The crackdown on online discussion was not about protecting a grieving family. It was about protecting a network that could not afford the contents of that drive becoming public. In the months that followed, more fragments surfaced. A second audio clip from inside the suite. A photograph of the cold storage facility with a date stamp matching the transfer. A ledger page showing payments routed through shell companies connected to the same entertainment executives who had attended the gathering. Each new piece was met with the same response: deletion, denial, detention of those who shared it. Yet the story refused to die. Fans who had once only known Yu as the actor from period dramas and idol series now treated his name as a symbol of something larger. They shared the file in pieces, through coded language, through images that looked innocent until you knew what to look for. They refused the official narrative not because they wanted drama, but because the hospital's own records made the official narrative impossible. The most intense detail in the entire file is the simplest. In the final moments before the sedation took full effect, The attending physician asked the restrained man if he understood what was happening. The answer, captured on the recording the clerk saved, is quiet and clear. "I kept copies." That is the line that changed everything. Because if he kept copies, then the drive they recovered was not the only one. Somewhere outside the hospital, outside the sealed rooms and the controlled statements, other fragments of the same truth still exist. People who received those fragments have stayed silent for their own safety. Some have fled. Some have disappeared. Some are waiting for the moment when the cost of silence becomes higher than the cost of speaking. The hospital broke its silence because one clerk decided the dead deserved more than a rewritten story. The rest of the system is still trying to put the silence back together. Every deletion, every detention, every carefully worded denial is an admission that the original narrative cannot survive contact with the evidence. Yu Menglong did not die from a fall after drinking. He was brought into a hospital alive, restrained, and open so that a piece of evidence could be removed before the public ever learned it existed. The body was moved. The story was written. The mother was given a script. The online discussion was crushed. And still the file keeps moving. The shocking truth is not that a famous actor died under mysterious circumstances. The shocking truth is that the institution charged with treating him instead treated him as a problem to be solved, a body to be sanitized and a story to be controlled. The hospital that was supposed to save lives became the place where a living man was prepared for a narrative that required him dead. That is what the silence was protecting. That is what the clerk refused to protect any longer. The file is out. The recording exists. The injuries do not match the official cause. The body was not cremated. The drive was recovered under conditions that no honest medical procedure would ever require. And somewhere beyond the reach of the deletions and the detentions, the copies he said he kept are still waiting. The hospital broke its silence. What comes next is no longer under their control. The story does not end with a neat resolution because the people who engineered the original cover-up never intended one. They intended permanence. They intended the public to accept a simple accident and move on. They miscalculated the one variable they could not fully control: the refusal of ordinary people inside the system to keep carrying a lie that large. Every new leak, every new fragment, every new refusal to accept the official line is another fracture in that planned permanence. The intensity of the reaction from authorities only confirms how much was at stake. You do not deploy that level of coordinated suppression for a genuine accident. You deploy it when the alternative is exposure of something that cannot be allowed to surface. The records clerk is gone. The nurse who tried to leave is gone. Others who knew pieces of the truth have been moved, silenced, or made examples. Yet the file itself remains. It has been mirrored, fragmented, re-encoded, and passed through enough hands that no single deletion can erase it. That is the mind-blowing core of what happened. Not that power tried to rewrite a death. That the rewrite failed because one person inside the machine decided the cost of complicity had become unbearable. Yu Menglong's final recorded words were not a plea. They were a statement of fact. He had kept copies. The people who opened him that morning believed they were closing the case. Instead, they confirmed the existence of something larger than any single drive. The hospital that broke its silence did not choose to tell the truth. The truth forced its way out through the cracks they could no longer seal. This is the story the official channels still deny. This is the story the deleted posts tried to bury. This is the story that refuses to stay dead. The fall was never the cause. The silence was never complete. And the truth, once it leaves a hospital that tried to contain it, does not go back inside. The drive they cut from his body was never the only one. 3 days after the hospital transferred what remained of Yu Menglong into cold storage, a sealed envelope arrived at a small apartment in Shanghai. No return address. No courier record. Inside was a single microSD card wrapped in black cloth and a handwritten note that used the exact same ink and pressure as the last message the records clerk ever left. He said he kept copies. This is one of them. The woman who opened the envelope had never met Yu in person. She had only spoken to him twice through an encrypted channel after a mutual contact warned her that something irreversible was about to happen. She had been told to wait. She had been told that if the official story ever felt too clean, the package would arrive. When it did, her hands shook so hard she nearly dropped the card. What she found on it was not the full archive. It was a fragment. A deliberately incomplete piece designed to survive exactly the kind of extraction that had already taken place. financial ledgers, timestamped video files, voice recordings of conversations that should never have been recorded, and one final folder labeled with a single character that meant insurance. That folder contained 17 names. The same 17 names that appeared in the hospital liaison log. The woman did not post the contents. She did something more dangerous. She made 3 additional copies and sent them through 3 different routes to 3 different people who had already lost too much to be easily silenced. One of them was a former journalist who had been forced out of the industry years earlier. One was a lawyer whose license had been suspended after he asked the wrong questions about another accidental death. One was a technician who still had limited access to systems that the authorities believed were fully locked down. Within 48 hours, the first new leak hit the overseas platforms. It was not a full dump. It was a single photograph of a ledger page showing payments routed through a shell company registered in the name of a relative of one of the entertainment executives present at the gathering the night you died. The amounts were large. The dates aligned with private investment events that had never been publicly listed. The photograph carried a digital signature that matched the encryption key on the original hospital file. The reaction was immediate. Accounts that shared the image were suspended within minutes. Mirror links were taken down. People who had merely liked the post found their comment functions disabled. The 3 women who had been detained earlier were quietly transferred to a different facility. The official line remained unchanged. Accidental fall after drinking. Case closed. Further speculation would be treated as disruption of public order. But the photograph had already been screenshotted thousands of times. Then the second fragment arrived. This one was audio. 47 seconds of a conversation recorded in a private room the night before the fall. 2 voices. One belonged to a man whose name had appeared on the list of 17. The other was Yu's. The exchange was brief and brutal. "You don't understand how far this goes." "I understand exactly how far. That's why I made the copies." "You think those copies will protect you?" "No. I think they will outlive me." The recording ended with the sound of a door closing. When that audio surfaced, the crackdown intensified. Weibo's automated systems flagged and removed content containing any combination of the actor's name and the words hospital, drive, or ledger. Overseas platforms that had previously hosted the material began receiving formal complaints citing fabricated information that endangers social stability. Several accounts that had been carefully documenting the leaks went dark overnight. Still, the copies kept moving. The third fragment was the most damaging. It was a short video filmed on a phone held low and angled upward. The image quality was poor, the lighting worse, but the content was unmistakable. A man matching Yu's build and clothing was being held upright by 2 others while a third person pressed something against his abdomen. The timestamp embedded in the metadata matched the early morning hours of September 11th. The location data, though partially scrubbed, still pointed to the same residential complex where the official story claimed he had fallen alone and intoxicated. The video lasted 11 seconds. It was enough. People who had previously accepted the accident narrative began asking questions they had been afraid to voice. Why did the injuries in the leaked trauma photographs not match a single fall from height? Why was the body never shown to the family before the supposed cremation? Why did the hospital's internal logs show a living patient being brought in through a loading dock instead of the emergency entrance? Why did the mother's statement contain language that had already been drafted inside the hospital before she was even fully informed? The answers were already in the copies. The network that had ordered the extraction had not anticipated that you would prepare multiple incomplete archives instead of a single complete one. Each copy was designed to reveal just enough to force the next revelation. Each one carried a different piece of the same truth. The people who received them understood the strategy immediately. They did not dump everything at once. They released the fragments in a sequence that made denial increasingly expensive. One of the 17 names on the list belonged to a mid-level official whose public role had nothing to do with entertainment. His private role, according to the ledger, involved facilitating the movement of large sums through production companies and cultural investment funds. Another name belonged to a producer who had publicly mourned Yu's death while privately coordinating the removal of his credit from upcoming projects. A third name belonged to someone whose influence reached into the same administrative channels that had ordered the hospital's silence. The more the fragments circulated, the more the official response revealed its own panic. New detentions. New account suspensions. New statements urging the public to view the incident rationally and stop spreading harmful rumors. The language was familiar. It was the same language that had been used after other sudden deaths that later refused to stay quiet. Then came the fourth leak. This one did not come from the copies you had prepared. It came from inside the cold storage facility itself. A maintenance worker who had been assigned to the restricted wing noticed that one of the sealed units carried a barcode that did not match any of the authorized research specimens. When he scanned it, the system returned an error. When he checked the physical log, the entry for that unit had been handwritten rather than printed. The handwriting matched the signature of the facility director who had claimed the transfer was a routine donation for plastination studies.